By the magic of radio, we're going to span the breadth of the United States and take you to a little fella named Jimmy. Jimmy is suffering from cancer.
In May of 1948, a breakthrough against cancer was discovered. The power of everyday people. People by the hundreds of thousands reaching into their pockets for extra change, saying, "I am Jimmy," and changing the history of cancer treatment, making a promise to patients at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. We are here. We will fight this together. We will never give up. Funding research and saving lives in endlessly creative ways. Joining doctors, researchers, and scientists in one resounding voice saying, "I am Jimmy."
People coming together, the nickels, the dimes, the dollars, become millions of dollars, and all of a sudden, I'm standing here today.
When my wife had cancer, doing the Jimmy Fund Walk gave me an opportunity to fight cancer with her.
When the doctors said that everything looked clear, I felt like, oh, after this, I'm going to have a dance party.
Now we're able to cure more than 90% of the kids with the most common type of leukemia.
Cancer is relentless, but we're making more progress than ever because we know who we are.
I am Jimmy.
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 We're all Jimmy.
Welcome, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. It's great to see everybody here today. I'm Suzanne Fountain. I'm Vice President of Jimmy Fund, and in that role, I oversee all the event fundraising for the Jimmy Fund. As any good event fundraiser would do, my computer is broken, and at the last minute, I couldn't get on my phone, and I'm in a cabin in Maine with no background. So you just spin and you make it happen. So hopefully everybody can hear me. If you can't, just put it in the chat. I taught school the early part of my career, and the majority of my career has been with the Jimmy Fund and Dana-Farber, and it's been fabulous. I really knew from day one when I got the job that this was the best job I could ever have in fundraising. And I still feel that excitement today and that passion every time I go to an event. As many of you here today can attest to running an event, participating in, or volunteering for an event takes a huge commitment. It takes hard work, it takes passion, it takes dedication and effort. And the thrill of that day when the event happens and seeing all your efforts come to fruition, it just never gets old. So my deepest thanks to each and every one of you, my endless thanks for all that you do for the Jimmy Fund. We want this program to be interactive, so I welcome you all to write in the chat wherever you're tuning in from as we kick off today. And if you've participated in any Jimmy Fund events, please share your thoughts with us and your experience. We want to hear from all of you today. As always, some housekeeping remarks. We're keeping you on mute throughout the program, and we want you to use the chat icon at the bottom. So we'll have time to address any of your questions. Just a reminder, we won't be able to address any personal health concerns, and we would encourage you to talk with your physician or your oncologist as appropriate. So some fun, quick facts that you probably already know about the Jimmy Fund. It was started in 1948 with the help of the Variety Club in New England. It was an organized radio broadcast from the bedside of a young cancer patient they call Jimmy, as he was visited by members of the Boston Braves. Remember, there were two baseball teams in town at the time. And when the Braves left, the Red Sox endorsed and took over their relationship with the Jimmy Fund, and it's been an amazing partner ever since. Next year, we're excited to celebrate the Jimmy Fund's 75th anniversary. So look forward to more information about that coming your way in the coming year. The Jimmy Fund is, again, as you all know, is a terrific example of the power of community fundraising. Every dollar raised from an individual donor or participant is really essential to Dana-Farber and what we're able to do with innovative science, which leads to tomorrow's cures. And it allows our researchers and physicians to provide that world-class care to all of our patients and our families. The Jimmy Fund currently includes so many types of events, everything you can think of really, from the PAMAS Challenge, our annual bike-a-thon that raises more money for any charity in the country, and our flagship Boston Marathon Jimmy Fund Walk. We have golf tournaments, gaming fundraisers, our Scooper Bowl, our radio telethon, and just a myriad of community-based events, many of which you have all participated in. Some facts: there are over 400 fundraising events held each year in support of Dana-Farber and the Jimmy Fund, and we have 75,000 participants and volunteers. Last year in 2021, we raised almost $90 million together under the banner of the Jimmy Fund. And additionally, Jimmy Fund events and programs are really powerful and really important as a driver for new people and new events to come to the Dana-Farber. Nearly 40% of our event donors are first-time donors to Dana-Farber and go on to make many more gifts. Today, you're going to be hearing some amazing speakers, each of whom has had their own way of participating in the Jimmy Fund community, and we'll share that with you today. And now I'm going to introduce Dr. Sallan. Steve, I know you don't like long introductions, so I'll make it short. He received his MD from Wayne State University of Medicine, completed residencies in pediatrics at Boston Floating Hospital, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and the Hospital for Sick Children in London. And he served as a fellow in the pediatric oncology program at Children's Hospital and Dana-Farber. And then after that, he joined the staff and has been here ever since. He is also the Quick Family Chair in pediatric oncology. But for me today, the really important thing about Steve is he's the team captain of Dana-Farber Walks for Wellbeing and our Boston Marathon Jimmy Fund Walk. So Steve, I want to turn the program over to you. We want to hear a bit about your role and what you do for the Jimmy Fund.
Well, thank you very much, Suzanne, for a kind invitation. And thank you all for being here. I can't see any of you, but hopefully you can see me, and more importantly, see my colleagues on the screen here. 3 of us today are going to be presenters to you. And in a moment, we'll each introduce ourselves. What we clearly share in common and how we've gotten to your screen here today is that we're senior faculty members at Dana-Farber. We're leaders in our own areas, and we are dedicated investigators. And we also, as you've heard, are all Jimmy Fund event participants. And I'm going to, when it's time, let Nicole and Jennifer speak for themselves. My event happens to be the Jimmy Fund Walk. And on our most recent virtual walk, that's me walking with my daughter, who happens to be a nurse practitioner in the Jimmy Fund clinic, when we couldn't walk as a big group. At any rate, we are all event participants, and we all have a story to tell you. And the common ground of what each of us will tell you is that there is really kind of a universal interest and need for what each of us do in our own way. And what we love to do in the context of our presentations is basically to feed back to you who have been donors and supporters how we spend that hard-earned money that you raise for us and how important it is to us. So I'm going to ask each of my colleagues to briefly introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce myself and give you my little anecdote. So maybe just because that's the way they appear on the screen, we'll start with Nicole.
Thanks so much, Dr. Sallan. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, yes. Great. So my name's Nicole LeBoeuf. I'm actually a dermatologist, and I've been working at Dana-Farber for more than a decade now. I am the vice chair for the Department of Dermatology here and the chief of the division of oncodermatology. So in this role, I wear 2 hats. I take care of and study rare and advanced skin cancers. And I also take care of patients who are suffering from side effects from cancer therapies in the skin and the hair and the nails. And so, you know, my research and my clinical care sort of sits in those 2 camps. My connection with the Jimmy Fund is that I have been running the Boston Marathon for the Dana-Farber for the last 11 consecutive Boston marathons in honor of my patient partner here, Ben, who's pictured the farthest to the right, and there he is. So again, 11 Bostons for Dana-Farber, and always considering when I might retire from that. But again, I'm happy to dive deeper into my story when we get a chance to talk a little bit more.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Great, thank you. I'm Jennifer Ligibel. I am a medical oncologist. I work in the breast cancer program at Dana-Farber. I've been here for a very long time. I am also the director of the Leonard P. Zakim Center for Integrative Therapies and Healthy Living. And I do research in how nutrition and physical activity impact cancer risk and outcomes. And I think our common theme here today is our long-term commitment to the Jimmy Fund. And I have been a PMC rider for the last 21 years. Hard to believe that's myself and my husband that you see. We met actually biking, so that is another good thing for me about riding in the Pan Mass Challenge. But really happy to be here today and excited to talk a bit about how all of this fundraising really makes such a difference for our research and our patients at Dana-Farber.
Outstanding. Thanks, Jennifer. And as you've heard, I'm Stephen Sallan. I think I'm starting my 49th year at Dana-Farber, and I've been a pediatric oncologist all of that time. I'm a 20+ year walker in the Jimmy Fund Walk. I was the chief of staff at the Dana-Farber for about 20 years, and throughout most of my career, I've run a large program that integrates the clinical care and research in the most common of the childhood leukemias. And in my anecdote to explain how your philanthropic endeavors support our common interests, I'm going to choose an example from actually the childhood leukemia area. So without further ado, let me give you an example of what your money can do in the context of leukemia research. And the gist of this will really be, one, how we spend your money. And the word that there will be several words I'll focus on. One is we use it for leverage, because your money is critical in a way that our other funding other than philanthropy that we really depend upon is from the National Institute of Health. And those funds are enormous in supporting the Institute, because in addition to covering our research, our investigators, our technicians, our laboratories, the animals, they also pay for the heat, light, and electricity. So for every government dollar, we get about $1.70 or more. So those are the big bucks. So for us, for me, in this program, I'm going to give you an example of philanthropic dollars do something quite different. They provide leverage for those giant bucks, but they also do something that Uncle Sam doesn't do. So philanthropic dollars fund the spark of discovery. They pay for creativity, something that our grant funders never do. Uncle Sam only puts those big bucks on winners. So you basically have to do it before you can get the money to do it from Uncle Sam. So what you are doing as donors and fundraisers is providing that spark. And the example I would give you of a spark of discovery came from one of my actual adult medical oncology colleagues. I work very closely between the adult and pediatric programs. And several years ago, one of our young, clever immunology investigators discovered that most of the children's leukemias had on the cells, on each of the leukemia cells, a protein that he discovered. And he called it, for in purposes of this presentation, 19. It's an easy number. And when we knew that all of the children's leukemia cells were a little different from their other normal cells because they express this protein 19. We said, well, if we could get rid of protein 19, maybe we could get rid of leukemia cells. So he made another very important discovery. He made an anti-19 antibody. Basically, he made another protein that would attach like a magnet to the children's leukemia cells, and the anti-19 would glom onto the 19 just like magnets. And when they came together, they would kill the cells. And it was very cool. It worked in the laboratory in petri dishes, if you will. It worked in animals. And we said, wow, we've got it. We've got the answer to leukemia. And we made a bag full of these antibodies, just like an IV bag or a blood transfusion bag. And we ran it into a couple of children for whom there was no other alternative. And it worked pretty well, but it turns out that 19 is on some of our normal kidney cells too. And it sort of hurt kidneys. And we said, we can't do that. So we said, well, how can we give this anti-19 to these children outside of their body? And we said, ooh, well, we do transplants. So one of the things we did was we took these children, again, they had no recourse, and we took them to the operating room. We took out a lot of their leukemia, which included a lot of their bone marrow, which included clearly their leukemia cells. And we kind of ran it through kind of like a car wash that would take off all the 19s from the cells that were going through this machine. And then we would put that bone marrow back in a bag and we give it back to the children. And somewhat miraculously, we were able to cure some relapsed leukemia by doing these washed, self-donated, if you will, bone marrow cells. We took that magical experience with cured children to Uncle Sam. So we had expended about $100,000 in donor funds. We took it to Uncle Sam, and we were awarded a $10 million grant in a program that was sustained over 20 years at over $20 million a year. So it became one of the biggest grants at Dana-Farber. And the spark of discovery and the creativity were the philanthropic dollar contribution and the enormous impact of those experiments, which today are in very fancy new immunotherapies, so-called CAR T cells you might have read about, and different antibody therapies that now we use in frontline treatment, not only of children with leukemia, but adults with leukemia and lymphoma and myeloma and many other diseases as well. So big discovery, a big chance that we took, rewarded not only in dollars, but in hundreds of cured patients. And it's an example of how we use philanthropic dollars to leverage big federal grants and huge important outcomes. And I'll stop there and turn this over, just because she's next on my screen, to Nicole.
Thanks so much, Dr. Sallan. That's it. I mean, it's just amazing. So you're basically what you were saying was that very first step, that investigator needed the philanthropic funds to do the first step to generate that important data to make that first bag that you saw even works in the first place. And I think that's really incredible when we think about the curing of cancer side of things. So again, with my rare and advanced skin cancer hat, I take care of patients with these lymphomas of the skin and rare skin cancers that may only happen 50 to 1,000 times per year in the entire country. And so they're incredibly understudied, and they're incredibly difficult to get money from Uncle Sam to study, because again, you have to do so much work first before the government will fund it. So a small example of where we've used philanthropic funds to study these rare cancers involves my patient partner. So you saw Ben, that little boy, when I started taking care of him when he was 8 over at the Jimmy Fund Clinic, is now in college, which is amazing. And he has a rare skin lymphoma that 10 years ago we had very, very few treatments for. And only recently, because of philanthropic funding for a clinical trial, one of our investigators developed this little grain of rice sized device where we can put 30 different drugs in this little grain of rice and put it in the tumor in the patient's skin. And then the chemotherapies in that little grain of rice kill off the lymphoma cells right there in the skin. And then we use a little skin tool to remove that grain of rice. And we can study which drugs are actually most effectively killing the lymphoma cells in that patient. And this is a really novel and groundbreaking way to look at rare cancers, where in order to study that many drugs in people, we would have to do clinical trials over decades. And so because we were able to get some donor funds to do this pilot clinical trial, we're generating all of this really fabulous data that will allow us to pick the drugs that are being used in other diseases in this much more rare disease. So Ben has been my Jimmy Fund patient partner again for many years, and his family's been an absolute amazing collaborator as we've raised funds through the marathon. And they always show up at mile 25. All the kids of the patient partners are there with their families. So we always say with the marathon, it's not 26.2 miles. You just need to make it to the patients at mile 25. And the last mile sort of just happens. You don't even remember it most of the time. But Ben sort of really inspired our group and worked to raise money so that we could do that clinical trial with lymphoma of the skin. And wearing my other hat, again, I think is really something that most people can sort of get their head around. We know that chemotherapy and cancer treatment is amazing and it saves lives. But even back when Dana-Farber was giving those first drugs to those first children with leukemia, they developed side effects of their lips and their mouth, their mucous membranes from those first chemotherapies. And at the time, his recommendation was to stop the chemotherapy if you got those terrible side effects, because they didn't know how else to treat them or prevent them. And many, many decades later, we still have many drugs that cause mouth sores and hair loss and skin rashes and all horrible, GI side effects. And so there's a huge need to really understand the cause of these side effects and then find ways to sort of block or treat the side effects, but leave the rest of your body alone to fight the cancer. And I think the easiest one for most people to sort of get their head around is hair loss, right? There up to 8% of women will refuse a particular chemotherapy regimen for their breast cancer because they don't want to lose their hair. And some people, say, oh, it's just your hair, it's just cosmetic, don't be so vain. But the reality is, for a young woman, for example, who has small children, losing your hair can be very traumatic for the whole family, or it's a privacy invasion. And because of donations and philanthropic funds over the last several years, we've been able to study the use of scalp cooling to prevent chemotherapy-induced hair loss. And so it's now pretty standard for certain chemotherapy regimens. But we have a new trial coming up studying it in a new regimen so that we can figure out where we can expand the use of scalp cooling so that more and more patients can go through their cancer treatment without having, everyone know that they have cancer or that they're on chemotherapy. And I think this is a really important point when we think about taking care of the whole patient. Because, when you talk to patients and you ask them what bothers them most, many of these patients are fierce warriors. They are going to beat the cancer. And the thing that drives them the most crazy is someone looking at them with cancer eyes, or, they just want to live their life and fight their cancer. And so our group works really hard at trying to come up with evidence-based ways to prevent and treat the side effects of cancer therapy. And these are, again, all novel approaches, and we rely heavily on donations to get the initial set of funding. So I am super grateful to the Jimmy Fund and to donors and to unrestricted funds where the institution can help guide where that money goes, because otherwise we just don't have the money to do that very first step, so that we can then go on to get the big bucks from the government.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, the spark of discovery, the first step is so difficult to get any kind of funding for. Most first steps are done without funding, to be honest, just because there's so much creativity amongst all of us that people will do it, but you can't really get to step two, no matter what, unless somebody's supporting you. And I think, again, the universal interest, ask anybody who's had chemotherapy, and yeah, they want to be cured, and nobody wants to be bald. And telling people they have leukemia and watching them cry is one thing. Watching them come back from the first day of school when everybody in the class, sort of saw their bald head is so painful. So yeah, these are needs that have to be met with Uncle Sam won't care about hair loss, just won't care. But you are supporters too. Thank you. Jennifer, you have the stage. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much. It's really great to be here. You know, I think in working at Dana-Farber now for more than 20 years, I think one of the things that has really been so meaningful to me is the equal commitment of the institution for these groundbreaking discoveries, but also to provide amazing, excellent care to our patients. And, you know, I think that over the 20 years that I've worked at Dana-Farber, we've seen incredible advances in the science coming from these sparks. People are living longer. There are more and more people that are cancer survivors that have finished their therapy. People are living longer than ever before with cancers that we didn't used to be very good at treating. Things like melanoma, things like lung cancer with new immunotherapies. But I think sometimes that only tells part of the story. And we've talked a little bit about side effects. And I think that, you know, we've developed new, smarter drugs, but sometimes they still leave people living lives that are really different than the lives that they were leading before they were diagnosed with cancer. And I think that we really can't stop with how do you treat the cancer, but we need to think about how do we really help support the patients. And you know, our work in the Zakim Center at Dana-Farber focuses on how do we give people the best lives that they can as they're going through cancer treatment, as they finish cancer treatment, or as they continue their therapy really for the remainder of their lives. How do we really help mitigate side effects? How do we help people feel good physically and feel good emotionally, spiritually, all the different ways that we need to support people. And so, you know, the Zakim Center provides programs in exercise, in nutrition, creative arts, meditation, mindfulness, things like acupuncture and massage. We study these things to try to figure out who do they help, why do they help them? And then we provide patient programming. And I think that, you know, through the pandemic, this has been such an incredibly important part of the work that we do at Dana-Farber. Our patients, for very good reason, for many years now, have really been isolated. And in order to keep themselves safe, sometimes that's meant that they don't have access to the kind of supportive services that people look to when they're going through cancer treatment. And one of the things that we've done through the pandemic in the Zakim Center is develop online programming and really found ways to reach out to our patients and get them their exercise program, their yoga, their nutrition advice from the safety of their own homes. And we found that more than 50,000 patient visits happened in 1 year through these virtual ways of reaching people. We've gotten comments from patients saying this was their lifeline through the pandemic, and it was really what kept them going from day to day when other sources of support weren't there. And I will tell you that as critical as this type of support is for patients, it's also something that's not supported by insurance or by, you know, kind of typical sources of what pays for cancer care. And this is why, you know, I always tell everyone, you know, at the Zakim Center, our lights wouldn't go on. We wouldn't have a Zakim Center if it wasn't for community-based fundraising. And this is really now for 20 years what's kept us supporting patients and their families through cancer. So I really can't express enough gratitude on behalf of myself and the people that I work with and all the patients that we care for the support of this community.
Wow, thanks a lot, Jennifer. And thank you both. We've as promised, left about 7 minutes or so to address your questions and concerns. I've been trying to follow the chat box while I was listening to Nicole and Jennifer, multitasking. And one of the things that is real early in the chat box was somebody from Shrewsbury, and I believe there's a Shrewsbury member of our panel. Is that possible? Are you from Shrewsbury, Nicole?
No, I'm from Tewksbury. Sound alike.
Oh, wrong Bury. Sorry.
Very different place.
There's also a 62-year survivor who was knew Sydney Farber, was part of the care in here. there's also a reminder that as we, talk about our cures and all the things and advances and whatnot, there's a reminder of a family of somebody who still, had a family member who still has a disease, a really very high grade brain tumor that occurs mostly in children. It's universally fatal, even in 2022, 100% of the patients die. So that's kind of a focus of where everyone's work gets directed one way or the other. We have a question that came in, and I wonder if you, Nicole, and Jennifer would sort of say a bit on it. It was a question about, the question was really about proportion of money that's restricted as opposed to unrestricted giving. And I will just introduce sort of my idea of the definition. The problem with restricted money is you can only do exactly what the donor's intent is, and unrestricted covers everything else. And as you heard from both Nicole and Jennifer, there are needs that usually don't come with necessarily a tag on them. And I wonder if you would comment on the role of unrestricted versus restricted money that supports your work, either one of you. I don't know, whoever would like to go first. I see you're both.
I'm happy to start.
Yeah, you're so nice to work with you two. Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
So I think, this is a great question. And, I think that there are really important uses of both restricted and unrestricted fundraising. I think sometimes it's hard to predict where that great need is or where that next spark will come. And I think the great thing about unrestricted fundraising is it really allows the Institute to try to figure out where that next best thing is. So I think that unrestricted fundraising is so important, and a lot of the money that we do raise through events is unrestricted. I think there is also a real role, though, for restricted fundraising. And I think that especially sometimes people will get together, they'll work with a scientist, they'll really want to be able to build a program. And sometimes that's really important for those steps between the spark and the grant from the government in really trying to bring things to the next level. And so, I think that both of those are very important types of fundraising. Sometimes the restricted is more impactful if it is attached to a particular project, and there's definitely a little more planning that's involved there to make sure that the funding really does get things to the place they need to be. But I think that obviously we love funding of all different kinds, but I think it's a little bit of a different process. And if you're not sure kind of what would be the best use, I think the unrestricted path is probably the best way to go. But if you have a scientist that you're working with or a particular passion, that's also very helpful to the Institute.
Got it. Thanks. Nicole?
I think one of the important points are sort of in thinking about, I raise all this money for the BAR program, which is part of the recipient of the Dana-Farber Marathon Challenge funds. So it's semi-restricted to innovative basic science, but not restricted to any particular disease or scientist or anything like that. The most important thing that I've learned, again, in the last 12 years or so being part of Dana-Farber, is to trust the Institute is going to do what is absolutely best with that money. And I think it's hard when it's your hard-earned money and you're giving it up to want to give, I want to give it to Sarah Talini to cure breast cancer for my sister-in-law. I want to give it to, the people studying lymphoma to cure lymphoma for Ben, my patient. But that might not always be the best place for it at that moment in time, because of all those different types of funding that are available. And what I've seen through working in the clinic and in with clinical trials and then in philanthropy is that I can 100% trust that the institution is absolutely aware of and will do what's best for it at that moment in time. And that's made me just feel a lot better about raising money for the Jimmy Fund in any way that I can.
Well done. It's so interesting. Trust, the black box that people always are worried about, where will it go? I don't want to be paying, for heat and light in the labs, but working in the cold sounds good today, but generally speaking, I mean, the environment in which we work really sustains all of us. And I think regardless of restricted, unrestricted, when the end product is really what all of us care most about. And that's, you know, when you want to buy goosebumps, you just have to have that trust, and we'll try to deliver. I think we've used up our time, Suzanne, and I should probably turn this back over to you and the troops.
Okay. Yes. So thank you, Steve, Jennifer, Nicole, for your time with us today, for your incredible work that you do, and for your personal commitment to our Jimmy Fund event participation. It just means so much to all of the staff and to all of our donors and all of our patients to know that you're doing incredible work in curing cancer, but you're also raising money to support those efforts. I want to thank everybody here today for participating and for all your questions. And if we weren't able to get to all of your questions, we will just know that our team will follow up with you. And also know, just as everyone has said, all of the work done by the presenters today and all of our physicians and clinical care people, as everyone has mentioned, they said, you were part of that success. So please feel proud about that and all the steadfast support you give Dana-Farber. Before we close, I want to mention that we're in the midst of the Dana-Farber campaign, which is our ambitious multi-year, $2 billion fundraising effort to prevent and defy cancer. And we do that by accelerating revolutionary science, extraordinary care, exceptional expertise, and essential opportunities. And as Jennifer and Nicole and Steve all said, restricted money and unrestricted money all are so important to what we do here. If you want to learn more about our campaign, you can use your camera to scan the code. It'll take you to our campaign website. And then you'll be receiving an email with a recording of this program that you can share with people who are on your teams or participate in your events if you would like to let them know more about the good work that we're doing at Dana-Farber and they're supporting. And it will also have a link to register for upcoming webinars. The next one will be September 8th, and it will be from noon to 1, as you can see on the slide, featuring pediatric oncology. So, which Steve shared a lot about with you today. And finally, we will have a link for a survey that we'd love for you to participate. The way these sessions get better and better each time is by your input and hearing from you what you want to hear about, what's important to you, what would make you come to another one. So please feel free to fill that out and give us your honest opinion. And then I just want to close again by expressing our deepest thanks to all of you for joining us today and for all that you continue to do for Dana-Farber. And I hope our paths cross this summer or fall now that we're being able to get back out into the community and have hybrid events and live events. So again, many thanks.